keep hearing this slogan from TikTok pundits, no U.S. wars for Israel. It's one of the top messages Qatar's online influence army is promoting these days. But is it true? When was the last time American troops joined Israel in a war? When was the last time Israel asked for American troops' help? Do you know how many U.S. troops are stationed in Israel to protect it? How many military bases the U.S. maintains in Israel? In fact, the U.S. has never had a military base in Israel. There are no barracks with thousands of U.S. troops there. 30 years ago, the U.S. stationed a handful of experts in Israel to help operate Patriot missiles for a few months during the first Gulf War. And then they did that same again recently. But those are temporary exceptions to the rule. There are no American bases in Israel and never have been. Now compare that to Arab and Muslim countries in the region, including several dictatorships that are hostile to America and even sponsor terrorism. I mean, let's start with the worst, Qatar itself. The U.S. built the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar 30 years ago. It now has 10,000 U.S. troops and about 100 U.S. aircraft based there. For some reason, U.S. taxpayers spend, $10 to $12 billion approximately every year operating that base, which defends Qatar. I mean, I get it. Qatar's government would likely fall within months if it weren't propped up by a foreign power. Qatar is an authoritarian dictatorship. It's hated by its own people. The last emir of Qatar became dictator by staging a coup against his own father. Qatar has 3 million people in it, but only 300,000 are citizens. 90% of the people there are temporary foreign workers or servants with no civil rights. If they didn't have oil money there, they would just be an empty patch of sand in the desert that no one would care about. But they're staggeringly rich due to dumb luck and geology, and they've taken that money and poured it into things like terrorist groups like Hamas, propaganda outlets like Al Jazeera, that's owned by the Qatari royal family, and influence operations in the West, becoming by far the top donors to U.S. universities. Isn't that weird? And they have a pretty smart strategy of hiring influencers, hiring pundits around Trump. You've probably seen some of that lately. 250 influencers on the dole. Anyways, back to Americans going to war for Arabs. Over the course of time, that one U.S. base in Qatar has cost U.S. taxpayers $35 billion, including construction and upgrades, not even including the cost of the men and the operations who work there. Why are U.S. taxpayers paying to prop up a royal family of depraved billionaire layabouts who actually hate America and sponsor terrorism? Why are American soldiers putting their lives on the line for some desert royal family? Now, I don't know the answer. I think there's a small chance it might have to do with Qatar sitting on top of so much oil and gas. And maybe the U.S. government thinks it's better for American soldiers to be there to fill the void instead of Russian soldiers or Chinese soldiers or even Iranian soldiers. And maybe the U.S. likes having a forward operating area for other wars. CENTCOM is now on that base. Those could all be legitimate reasons, but that's for Americans to decide. Same thing goes for 3 different U.S. bases in Kuwait for their royal family too, and 2 bases in Iraq. The U.S. even has a base in Turkey where nuclear weapons are reportedly stored. Turkey is so authoritarian, I really have no idea why they're even in NATO, other than, I guess, what U.S. President Lyndon Johnson used to say, better to have your enemies inside the tent pissing out than outside the tent pissing in. He was a character. And you want to talk about cost and needlessly wasted American life? Well, don't get me started on the disastrous venture into Afghanistan. That's measured in the trillions of dollars and the thousands of lost lives. And the shocking, hasty, demoralizing images of America being chased out, leaving behind billions in equipment, really is the signature move of the Biden administration. But seriously, there are at least a dozen U.S. bases in the Middle East, all in Muslim countries like Qatar, Kuwait, Iraq, Jordan, Saudi Arabia. There's even a small base with a couple hundred Americans operating in Syria. Rough numbers, the U.S. has spent $200 billion building up its network of military bases in Muslim countries. The U.S. Navy alone spends about $50 billion a year patrolling the Persian Gulf sea lanes. That's obviously to protect the oil trade. Now, my point is, none of that has anything to do with Israel or the Jews. Tens of thousands of brave American military servicemen are taken away from their homes and their loved ones and put in the heart of some of the worst places in the world on standing orders to fight and die for the countries that show little allegiance to America and that few Americans could find on the map. And we don't have a cultural or ethnic or religious connection there. None of those countries that Americans are defending on the ground are called Israel. By the way, it's not just the Muslim countries. Why does America still have 40 military bases in Germany? 40, with 50,000 troops there. Why are there even more troops in Japan? In dozens of bases there too. 25,000 in South Korea, acting as a kind of tripwire in case Kim Jong-un tries to invade. Americans would literally be amongst the first killed. Unlike Qatar, Germany and Japan and Korea are real countries with some of the world's strongest economies. Why is American blood and treasure sent over to protect them? Why does America seem to never leave a country after a war? I mean, have you ever wondered why the U.S. has a base in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba? You know, it's because America fought a war there in 1898 and just sort of never left, right? That's why America's in Japan, Germany, and Korea too. Altogether, around the world, there's around 250,000 U.S. troops serving overseas in some 750 bases in more than 75 countries, but none of those countries is called Israel. Now, whether this is all a good idea is for Americans to decide. It's their men and their money. I'm a Canadian. I love America, and I'm grateful for the fact they protect us. By the way, I think there are some good answers to all of those questions. Those bases protect American force around the world. They protect American commerce and access to resources. They're staging areas for the U.S. to react anywhere quickly. And like I said before, if it's not America filling the void, it would probably be China. Just look at Africa, where the U.S. doesn't have the same presence and China is filling in. So that's military bases. But the question was fighting in Israeli wars. How many actual boots on the ground wars has America fought for Israel? It's true, Trump recently deployed 6 B-2 bombers on a mission to blow up Iran's nuclear weapons facilities, but I don't think you could really call that a war. That was the final mission of the so-called 12-day war, where Israel had conducted more than 1,000 airstrikes against targets, clearing away the surface-to-air missiles, making sure the skies were safe before the U.S. came in the final hand. But let me take a few more minutes of your time. I want to take you through America's recent wars. And again, per the anti-Israel Twitter brigades, you tell me which of these was for Israel. And I'm not defending these wars. You can like them or oppose them. I'm just listing them. And you tell me which of the wars are the Jewish wars. Okay, let's start with the Second World War. Hitler invaded Europe in September of 1939. And by the way, he started killing the Jews in the Holocaust right away. But America did not join the war to stop that, or Germany, or the Holocaust. America didn't join the war for more than 2 years. It wasn't until December in 1941, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, that the United States declared war. And then, by the way, Germany declared war on America. The war was not about the Jews for the Americans. And then came the Korean War and the Vietnam War. Nothing to do with Jews there, just America trying to contain the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Same thing in the Grenada and Panama skirmishes. I won't call them wars. Have you heard of the Monroe Doctrine? It's an American foreign policy rule to keep major powers out of the Western Hemisphere. That was the reason behind the Cuban Missile Crisis, too. America was not prepared to have the Soviets messing around that close to the U.S. After the Cold War was over, almost all of America's wars were about Muslims, not Jews. The Gulf War, well, that was when Arabs in Iraq invaded Arabs in Kuwait. And for some reason, America sent 700,000 troops to sort that out. Hundreds died, by the way, for Kuwait or for oil, I'm not sure what, but not for the Jews. Then came the Somali Civil War. Not sure what America was really doing there to this day, but Fighting pirates is as old as America itself, I guess. You might know the Marine song From the Halls of Montezuma to the Shores of Tripoli. You ever heard that?
From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, we fight our country's battles in the air, on land and sea.
One of the first American wars back in 1805 was against Muslim pirates. They were called the Barbary Pirates in Africa. I'll do a report one day from a small village in Ireland called Baltimore, where the entire village, 107 people, was kidnapped and taken to an Arab slave market in Algiers. That was back in 1631. You ever heard of that? So yeah, fighting against Muslim pirates goes back, 400 years, 200 years for America? Okay, let me speed up here. Next came the Bosnian War, the Kosovo War, the Afghanistan War, the Iraq War, the war against ISIS, the war in Libya, the war in Yemen. Do you see a bit of a theme here? Now, none of these wars Israel was involved. None of these Israel sent troops. This was not an Israeli war. Israel did have its own wars, that's for sure, against the PLO terrorists in Lebanon, against the Intifada domestically, against various Arab countries in 73 and 67. Israel has had no shortage of wars, but American troops fought in none of them. Now, it is true that Israel gets $3 billion every year in military aid from the United States. That is very true. That's a lot of money, $3 billion. It is a sliver of a fraction of what Qatar and Kuwait and Iraq and the rest of them get annually just for those bases, just the spending and the manpower. And again, no Americans are at risk for Israel's $3 billion. Don't even get me started on the comparison to Ukraine. But I still think Israel should say thanks, but no thanks for the $3 billion. Israel's military budget is more than $30 billion a year, and Israel's actually an economically strong country. That extra $3 billion is nice, but it's not necessary. And in fact, it's, I think, a kind of trap, because with money comes control. Anyways, my purpose today was to demonstrate that despite what some know-nothings on the internet say, Americans have never fought in an Israeli war. Americans are not stationed in Israel, and the American military aid to Israel is a fraction of what America spends on military bases in some very rich countries across the Middle East and indeed around the world, including in the richest countries like Germany, Japan, and Korea. By the way, I think American military relations with Israel are immensely valuable to America too. Israel was really the only bulwark against Soviet expansionism in the Middle East during the Cold War. Israeli wars against the Soviet Arab alliance served to contain the Soviets' ambitions, and without any cost of American lives, like in Korea and Vietnam. Israel was a real-life proving ground for U.S. weapons, such as the F-16 and F-15 fighter jets, and now the F-35. All of those planes saw their first combat in a real-life experience against Soviet weapons through Israel. There is no doubt that Israel's surgical strike against Iraq's nuclear reactor in the 1980s was the only reason why Saddam Hussein did not have a nuclear bomb when America invaded Iraq a few years later. Same thing again last month. In the 12-day war with Iran, Israel spent the first 11 days destroying every Iranian jet plane and anti-aircraft missile site. And then on the 12th day, America dropped bunker busters on Iran's nukes. I'd say America got plenty of value for the $3 billion a year it gives to Israel, at least compared to the hundreds of billions it sloshes around its other allies every year, if you can even call places like Qatar an ally. Of course, the bunker buster attack benefited Israel. It also benefited every other country in the region that Iran has terrified and attacked over the years. I count at least 15 countries, most of them Arab, that Iran has attacked over the years, not just threatened. They even sent missiles to Mecca. But of course, it's in America's interest too to take out the nukes. That's something Donald Trump has been talking about for more than a decade, long before he was even president. Of course, Iran has murdered and kidnapped hundreds of Americans, from taking U.S. diplomats hostage in the 1970s to murdering more than 200 Marines in the 1980s. Did you know that Iran provided most of the IEDs used against American troops in Iraq? And then there's the recent multiple assassination plots against Trump himself. Yeah, Israel and America both had a stake in knocking Iran down. The U.S. helped a lot of countries by bombing those nukes. One of them was Israel for sure. Now, contrary to the Qatar-financed Twitter brigade, Israel did not end up dragging America into World War III or any other war. Israel never has. Israel and America worked together to take nukes out of the hands of a global death cult dictatorship and left not only the region, but I think the whole world safer for it, including the 15 countries Iran has attacked before. There are already reports about a second wave of the Abraham Accords. That's Donald Trump's peace treaty that he's brokering between Israel and its Muslim neighbors. That's what Hamas's terror attack in October 2023 was designed to stop. And it did. But now peace is back. So the next time someone complains about U.S.-Israel cooperation, ask the obvious question. Why are they only talking about the Jews and not the 12 Muslim Middle Eastern countries where the U.S. spends far more militarily and gets much less in return? You might have to wait for their answer while they check with their Qatari funders first. Stay with us, more ahead.